Chapter 13. Liz and her friends walked back to Johnny's garage in silence. They automatically headed for the studio apartment in the back of the garage. So what do you guys want to do tonight? Michael asked. Well, Space Boy, those of us who have worked all day are looking forward to sleeping, Maria asked. We'll have to work out sleeping arrangements, Max said. Gesturing to himself, Michael, and Kyle, he added, we can sleep in the van. As the group came around to the side of the garage, Liz shook her head and said, we'll squeeze in. The floor will be better than another night in the van seats. They reached the apartment door and found a pile of blankets and sleeping bags next to it. The locals are simple and friendly people who offer travelers oatmeal, blankets, and dinner food, Maria said with a smile. That's really nice, Liz said, examining the pile. They were all old but clean. She grabbed up what she could and stepped inside, the others close behind her. What happened in here? She asked. The room looked different, like it had been painted. There were some other changes as well. Don't get us started, Michael said. Isabel, our alien redecorator. They took a few minutes to figure out how to fit everyone. There were 3 sleeping bags, some blankets, 4 regular pillows, and 2 couch pillows. The guys insisted that the girls take the sleeping bags and pillows while they make do with the blankets, the 1 pillow, and the 2 couch pillows. Max and Liz would sleep next to each other, taking the first turn on the bed. Maria and Michael would share a blanket on the floor, though Liz could see that things were strained between them. At least she could see the strain on Maria's face. Michael, on the other hand, seemed unusually relaxed. That meant that Kyle and Isabel would be next to each other. Kyle looked uncomfortable, but Isabel seemed oblivious. While there was a little room, they wouldn't be on top of each other. The way things looked for the near future, Liz figured they had all better get used to being close together. Back in Roswell, she dreamed about the day after she and Max had left home and they could spend the night together without worrying about parents. Well, she was getting her wish, but none of those dreams included 4 other people in the room. And Liz found that, at the moment, Max was not the most important thing on her mind. By now, everyone was sitting in his or her respective sleeping area. Liz stood up and said, I want to talk to you all about something. The room immediately fell silent. Everyone was looking at her. From the look in Max's eyes, Liz knew that he already knew what this was about, and he was not pleased. Max didn't wait for her to go on. Liz, we all feel for Jimmy, but this is a police matter. We can't get involved. Not right now, he insisted. Max, in case you weren't paying attention, the police are among the missing, Liz replied. Liz, we just can't. We're less than 500 miles from Roswell. We can't do anything to call attention to ourselves, Max said. He paused and said seriously, I'm sorry, Liz, but I can't allow it. Liz felt the blood rising to her face. I'm not asking your permission. She saw the surprise on Max's face. It hurt, too. Liz hated to see him look like that, but this was too important. As you said, you aren't making all the decisions for this group, Liz said. She softened her tone. I'm not talking about sending up a huge alien flare to the special unit, but maybe we can help. Find something out and place a call to the state police. That's it, she said. It makes me uncomfortable, Max said. Everything makes you uncomfortable, Isabel chimed in, surprising Liz. She had barely spoken since they left Roswell. If we never wanted to make you uncomfortable, we wouldn't have left the house since we climbed out of our pods, she added. Smiles broke out in the room at that. To Liz's surprise, one of them was on Max's face. There's something else, Liz said. I know for a fact that if we don't do something, Jimmy's sister Jessica is going to die. Did you have Max asked. I saw it when I touched him. I saw him at her funeral. I also saw her. She tried to describe the room that wasn't a room in the screams, but she knew they wouldn't understand unless they saw that place, heard those screams, and felt the menace that she had felt. Whoever has her is very dangerous, she said simply. Michael was the first to speak. I'm in, he said. That once might have surprised her, but less than 2 days ago, Michael had been the one to insist they help the Air Force pilot's daughter she believed was still alive and the victim of a government conspiracy. I don't like bullies, Kyle said. I'm in. I'll help, Isabel said. Liz looked at Maria, who shrugged and said, What? You already have a majority. Okay, I'll help. My grand waitressing powers are at your disposal. Liz looked at Max last. That's the problem with democracy. Not everybody gets what they want, he said, with a tight smile on his lips. Okay, I'm in. What's your plan? He asked. When she didn't respond, he prodded questioningly. You do have a plan. Well, I assumed we would come up with something together, Liz explained. It was true. She had been so focused on convincing the group that she hadn't thought about the next step. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out one of Jimmy's flyers. She had taken it from the diner as a reminder. Now she thought of a more practical use for it. Isabel, she said. holding out the flyer with a picture of Jessica on it. I'll do it, Isabel said, but it's a long shot. Since I don't know her, she'll have to be asleep for it to even have a chance of working. And she'll have to be dreaming something useful about her surroundings, something that will tell us about where she is and who has taken her. Liz nodded. A long shot it is. We know what will happen if we do nothing. Isabel tried to clear her mind. She found that most of the usual petty thoughts and distractions weren't there. They had been replaced by a single thought, by a single pain, Jesse. Leaving him had pushed aside a lot of things, cleared out the cobwebs. Now he seemed to have taken up residence in her brain as well as her stomach as a large, heavy ball. By force of will, she loosened the knot as relieved when it began to disappear. Flashes of her pain reared up from time to time. She let them come and bubble away. When her mind was finally clear enough, she opened her eyes and focused on the picture. She saw a girl of somewhere between 16 and 18 years old. She was pretty, and the picture looked poised, like a school picture. Jessica was smiling. Isabel concentrated on that smile. Images of Jessie and other feelings that were surprisingly strong rose up. The knot started to form in her stomach again. Isabel didn't fight it. Instead, she concentrated harder on the picture, the smile, Jessica. Then Isabel began to feel the girl. There was no better word to describe, to explain what dream walking was like. She simply concentrated until she was able to feel people. The closest analogy she could make was the feeling she had about people that lingered after she dreamed about them when she slept herself. Dream walking was like that feeling, but instead of dissipating as she woke up, it grew stronger and stronger until she was with them in their dream. With certain people, the feeling lingered long after the dream walk. She still had watches of Max from the time that she had dream walked him while he was in the special unit's white room. He'd been so scared and vulnerable. She had felt it all. She had also felt him more clearly than she ever had before while they were growing up. Then there was Alex. Isabel had dreamwalked him a number of times. At first, it was just to find out if he was a threat to their secret. But even then, the dreamwalks had left her feeling closer to him, connected to him in a way that she had no words for at the time. Eventually, she was able to give that closeness a name. For a very short time around the night of the dance, which she and Alex had held each other, and she had called the closeness by its proper name, in her head, if not to him, then Alex was dead. Oddly enough, thinking of Alex did not distract Isabel. It focused her concentration and her energy. It had happened before, and she liked to think that he was somehow helping her. Isabel began to feel Jessica more keenly, though the girl remained just out of sight, as if she was dancing on the edge of Isabel's peripheral vision. There was a cloud between them. Isabel had no trouble giving that cloud a name. It was fear. Wherever she was, Jessica was very afraid, even while she was sleeping. Isabel concentrated again and suddenly found herself in a bedroom. Looking at the decorations on the wall, she realized it was a little girl's bedroom. On the bed, she saw a dark-haired girl of perhaps 9 or 10 sleeping fitfully. It was Jessica, Isabel realized, and she was dreaming about herself as a little girl, sleeping in her room. The room felt very familiar to Isabel, but she knew that was only because it was familiar to Jessica. There was something else, too, a sense of deja vu, as if Jessica had not only been here before, but had had this dream before. Suddenly, Isabel was sure that Jessica was in the middle of a dream she had since she was a little girl. That made the dream less helpful for Isabel. A recurring childhood dream wouldn't have had the kind of detail that Isabel and the others would need to find Jessica in the real world. There was a noise from inside the closet on the other side of the room, and the girl on the bed opened her eyes. Isabel could see fear in young Jessica's eyes. Jessica glanced with recognition as if remembering this dream. Whatever was in that closet scared her badly. Isabel considered interfering, but decided to let the dream run its course. Perhaps it would show her something helpful. Jessica got out of bed and walked toward the closet. She did so almost unwillingly, as if she knew what was inside and was being forced by some twisted dream logic to seek it out. Isabel felt a swell of sympathy for the scared little girl in front of her in a long white nightgown, and the scared young woman out there somewhere. She wanted to stop the girl from opening the closet door, but Isabel forced herself to keep out of it. Jessica's life would likely depend on what Isabel could learn here. The girl padded across her room and reluctantly put her hand on the closet's doorknob. Slowly she turned it and started to pull at the door. An instant later, the door practically exploded open, throwing the girl backward and onto the floor in front of her bed. What happened next happened quickly. The first thing that Isabel noticed was the noise. A loud roar sounded from the closet. It wasn't an animal sound that Isabel had ever heard, nor did she recognize it as anything from any movie or television show she had ever seen. It was a high-pitched and piercing series of clicks and tones that Isabel could feel in her chest. Isabel was sure of one thing, though. It was terrifying. Jessica. Feeling her panic rise, Isabel realized that there was something unnatural in that sound. Reflexively, Isabel found herself raising up her hand to defend herself as Jessica backed away from the closet as she sat on the ground. Then the creature that made the sound took a step from the darkness of the closet into the light of the room. It was hideous. Isabel couldn't believe that it had come from a child's imagination. The creature had roughly the shape of a person, but that was where the resemblance ended. Covered in a scaly, brownish yellow skin, it had a large head that came to a point in the back of its skull. Its eyes were a bright yellow, and it had a wide mouth that jutted out from its face and was full of long teeth. It was a monster, and Isabel felt her blood run cold just looking at it. A scream sounded from behind her, and Isabel turned to see Jessica cowering against her bed. The creature looked down at Jessica, and then it seemed to notice Isabel. The monster began to make its sound, which was even louder now that it was free of the closet. When it lurched forward, Isabel instinctively raised her hand and summoned her energy. Before the monster could take a step, Isabel released her power and hit it full force in the chest. The creature betrayed a moment of surprise as it sailed backward into the darkness of the closet. As Isabel caught her breath, she sensed motion next to her. Then she turned to watch Jessica getting up and heading for the closet. "Wait," Isabel said. But before Isabel could act, the girl grabbed the closet door and slammed it shut. Then Jessica looked up at her and said, "We should go." Isabel nodded and said, "All right." She took Jessica's hand and they started walking for the bedroom door. They had only taken a few steps when Isabel felt the little girl jerk in her hand. Looking down, Isabel saw that something was pulling Jessica toward the bed. A claw with 3 fingers had snaked from underneath the bed and had grabbed Jessica's ankle. She recognized it as belonging to the creature from the closet. Jessica screamed, blind terror in her voice. "Help me! Don't let him take me!" Isabel pulled on Jessica's hand, trying to tear her away from the bed, but the creature was very strong, and Jessica started to slip down to the floor. "No!" Isabel heard herself scream. Then the world flashed around her, and Isabel found herself in a large room. No, not quite a room, she realized as her heart hammered in her chest. She looked around frantically and saw that the creature was gone. She was relieved, but still felt the tension and adrenaline of the encounter in Jessica's bedroom. As she started to relax, she took note of her surroundings. She was in a place that she had never seen before. It wasn't a room. It had a floor that was made up of some sort of metal and a ceiling maybe 10 feet above, but it did not have walls. The floor and ceiling seemed to go on forever on all sides until they just disappeared into the distance. There was no lights that she could see, but there was light all around her. Looking down, Isabel saw that Jessica was with her, lying on a low table. The girl had her eyes closed, but Isabel could see that she wasn't sleeping. The little girl's eyes were shut, but they were being squeezed shut tightly. Jessica was afraid, Isabel saw. She was as afraid here as she had been in her bedroom. Isabel decided that she couldn't let this continue. She would have to try to contact Jessica directly. It risked waking her up and expelling Isabel from the dream, but she had no choice. She wasn't going to learn anything in this place, and the girl was terrified. Leaning down, she took Jessica's hand and whispered, "It's all right. I'm here to help you." Keeping her eyes closed, the little girl shook her head and whispered back, "Don't make any noise. They'll come." "I've come to find you. My friends and I are going to help you," she said. "No, run. They'll catch you if you stay," Jessica said. The little girl's eyes opened, then her mouth opened. She was locked into a silent scream, gasping in terror over Isabel's shoulder. Spinning around, Isabel looked up and saw the monster from the closet's face. This time it was huge, hundreds of feet across, and looking down at them from above. Jessica screamed again, and this one wasn't silent. Isabel realized the sound was rising in her own throat, and then the world shifted around her again. Isabel came out of the dream in the small room off of Johnny's garage. Jessica's screaming still echoed in her mind as she shook her head to try to clear it. Someone had her by the shoulders. "Isabel," a voice called to her. She focused on his face. It was Max. All at once, the screaming stopped. She realized that it was she who had been screaming. Her friends were circled around her, looking at her with concern. Their sympathy made it harder for her to keep her composure as she stopped trying. She leaned into Max's arms and let him hold her. When she finally felt like she had control over herself, she pulled away. "What happened is?" Max asked, his voice gentle with concern. "She was having a nightmare," Isabel replied. She took a deep breath and explained everything she had just seen. When she had finished telling the story, Liz nodded and said, "Thank you, Isabel. I know that was hard for you." "Not as hard as it was for Jessica," Isabel replied. "Wherever she is, she's in real trouble and she's terrified. And I don't think she'll live long if we don't do something." "At the moment, there's nothing else we can do," Max said. "We still don't know anything that could help her." "I'll have to keep trying," Isabel said. "Are you sure you want to do that?" Max said. "I'm sure I don't," she replied. "But if I don't, Jessica will die, and Isabel thought about how to explain how scared Jessica was. She was in terrible danger, and she was just a little girl on the inside. And there was something else. Jessica had gone back to the closet to close the creature in, something Isabel was sure she would be afraid to do. And she had told Isabel to run, to save herself in that room. Jessica was brave and had tried to protect her. Isabel thought of how to explain that to her friends and decided she couldn't, not that it mattered. What she had to do, they couldn't help her with. Maybe there was something in the dream we could use, Liz said, turning to Maria. You used to interpret my dreams. What does the room mean? The monster, Liz asked her. Maria thought for a minute and said, Well, her room symbolizes security. When we dream about home, it represents a place where we can't be hurt. The fact that the monster is threatening her in her room is odd. Monsters usually represent the bad characteristics of the dreamer. She shrugged and continued. The large room without walls is emptiness. It usually means disappointment that a lot of effort put into something has come to nothing. The fact that she's stuck on the table is pretty clear. Helplessness. All in all, not very useful. Sorry. What if some of the dream images are real? Isabel asked. Which ones? Max asked, looking at her with surprise. I don't know. What if the monster is just the guy threatening her? No, not a guy. She said they, Isabel said. And what if she really is tied to a table somewhere? You may be right. You probably are, but that still doesn't help us, Liz said. I'll have to go back, Isabel said. But not tonight, Max said. If she woke up, it will be a while before she's asleep and dreaming again. You need some rest. Isabel nodded. She quickly undressed her bed, using her powers to make her shirt into a longer nightshirt. She was barely aware of the others around her. She crawled into her sleeping bag and put her head down. Though she was tired, she found that she was reluctant to close her eyes. Finally, she did. She only hoped that no dreams came. Chapter 14. Kyle and the others went to bed right after Isabel. After watching her dream walk and hearing her tell the story, no one wanted to talk or play cards anymore. That was just as well with him. It had been a long day. He had worked a full shift, and then there had been that business with Gomer. Settling under the blanket, he was suddenly very aware of the short distance between himself and Isabel. Barely a foot separated them. It wasn't that he minded. It was just that, well, he knew it was a necessity. There just wasn't room in this small apartment to give anyone much space on the floor. Still, he found he was very conscious of her breathing next to him, and as usual, she smelled wonderful. Then he realized that Dawn was nothing compared with Isabel. No, not nothing. She seemed nice enough, but she wasn't what he wanted. Well, it might be an accident, but it harmed no one if he enjoyed being close to her. His thoughts were foolish, she knew. She'd just broken up with her husband. Her husband. Not her boyfriend, but her husband. And even before Jessie, when she was free, she had never looked at Kyle in any way other than friendship. Still, the thoughts came anyway. And though they were foolish, he also knew that it wouldn't hurt anyone if he indulged in them. Isabel started in her sleep, and for a moment Kyle thought she might wake up. She didn't. Instead, her hand reached out and found his chest and rested there for a moment. He found that the sound of his own breathing and the beating of his heart seemed deafening. However, no one else in the otherwise quiet room seemed to notice. Then she was moving toward him in a sleepy haze. Kyle held his breath as she put her head down on his chest. He was amazed that the thundering inside didn't wake her, but she stayed asleep. Well, he thought, she's had a scare. It's only natural. She probably thinks I'm Jessie. Kyle regained his breath and slowly put his arm around Isabel's shoulder. He suddenly felt guilty about his thoughts about her. She was grieving the loss of her husband and scared to death for some poor girl. And there he was entertaining his schoolboy crush. They had more important things to think about now. Something awful was happening in this town. Liz, Isabel, and the others were trying to help. And Kyle knew that his own father would do. Sheriff or not, his father had never backed away from someone in trouble. Kyle would do the same. He didn't know what good it would do anyone. He didn't have Max's powers or even Liz's. He only had himself. Still, he would lend whatever help he could. Isabel stirred, and Kyle looked down at the top of her head. She did smell wonderful. Kyle knew it would be a long time before he fell asleep. When Kyle woke up, Isabel was already up. In fact, all the girls were. He saw that Max and Michael were just getting up as well. Maria was looking down at Michael and nudging him with her foot. Come on, space boy, you can walk us to work, she said. We all will, Kyle said, getting up himself. Isabel, you should come too. I don't want you here alone, Max said. Isabel nodded and said, I tried again, Max. I couldn't make contact at all. Kyle stepped forward and said, maybe she's just awake. Maybe, Isabel said flatly as she stepped outside. The others followed. Kyle could tell Isabel was still shaken up. Something had happened to her in the dream. She was scared. That told Kyle all he had to know what they were up against. He had rarely seen Isabel frightened. Kyle had always thought she was fearless by nature, cooler even than Max. Part of it was her power, she guessed. She could defend herself against almost anything. A larger part of it was just her nature, though. He had never seen her back down from anything, from a fight with an alien menace to an uncomfortable situation with a friend. Fear looked unnatural on her face, and Kyle found something strange rising up in himself. Anger. He was angry that something would take hold of Isabel that way. She had suffered enough. She had given up enough. Instinctively, Kyle found himself walking closer to her. It was absurd. Of the three guys in the group, he was the least able to protect her or anyone else. In fact, if it was not for Michael, he might not have survived his encounter with Gomer. Still, Kyle decided that anyone out to hurt Isabel would have to go through him first. At the diner, Belle insisted that they stay to eat breakfast before the place opened. Kyle was glad. The food seemed to take Isabel's mind off what was bothering her. Kyle ate quickly. He had something he wanted to do before work. He leaned down to Isabel and said, "Are you going to be okay?" "Sure," she said. She looked cool and collected. It seemed like the old Isabel was back, but Kyle didn't believe it for a minute. "Don't go to the laundromat," he said. "Stay with Max and Michael." She started to protest, but Max interjected. "You can keep trying to contact Jessica." "I'll check out the laundromat," Michael said. "I was the first runner-up for the relief attendant position." "Okay," Isabel said. "I'll keep trying to reach Jessica." Satisfied, Kyle said his goodbyes and headed back to the garage. He had about a half hour before work, and no one was in yet. Heading around back, Kyle found the minibus. It was sitting on cinder blocks and looking every one of its 30-some years of age. It had been a hippie vehicle. That much Kyle could see from the psychedelic paint. He wondered if Dan had been a hippie back then. Dan wore his long gray hair in a ponytail, but still the image didn't fit. He was way too serious a person. Kyle grabbed a few old tools from the shed in the back and got back to the van. He opened up the hood and checked out the engine compartment. He would need Dan's permission to open up the engine and take a look at the timing chain, but he did see a number of parts they could use: alternator, starter, fuel pump. They were all things that it would be a good idea to carry around as spares if they kept the van. After all, it was at least as old as his father, and Kyle was pretty sure that keeping it running would be a serious part-time job for him in the weeks to come. Next, he opened the driver's side door, which took some doing, and climbed inside. The interior wasn't in very good condition, with plenty of rust on the various pieces of exposed metal. There were only 2 seats in the front. The back was left open, covered by a light blue shag carpet that looked older than the van. It was also littered with old magazines and other junk, including a broken guitar. He checked the date on one of the magazines. It was a Life magazine from 1970. Like the van itself, it was an artifact from a different age, or a different world. In all likelihood, the van had been sitting on these cinder blocks since that time. In that case, it would never be good for anything other than parts and scrap metal. When he put the magazine down and opened, and something fell out. Kyle thought it was a response card and started to turn away when he noticed that it was actually a color photo. Leaning down, Kyle picked it up and looked into a window straight into the past. The photo was of the van when the psychedelic paint job must have been new. It was parked in front of the garage, which looked much newer as well. In front of the van was a tall, gangly teenager with long hair who was making a peace sign with his hand. He looked maybe 17, about Kyle's own age. Next to him was a boy of 12 or 13, who had his arm wrapped around the older boy's waist. The younger boy was smiling broadly and looking up in unabashed admiration at the hippie teenager. Kyle turned the picture over and saw scrawled on the back the words, "Me and Johnny." Turning it over again, Kyle studied the picture once more. There was something touching about the way the younger boy was looking at the older one. It's something familiar. "Hey," the boy said from outside. Surprised, Kyle lifted his head up quickly and banged it on the top of the van. Turning around, he saw Dan looking at him through the windshield. Up until now, Dan had been stiff and serious. In fact, Kyle realized that he had never seen the man smile. But there was no mistaking the expression on his face. Dan was angry. Kyle stepped forward, not sure how to handle this. What was his new boss thinking? Feeling clumsy, Kyle got into the driver's seat and pushed the door open. Once again, it was stuck, and he had to struggle with it to force it open. The whole time, Dan watched him, scowling. When he was outside, Kyle said, "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry if I—" "What are you doing?" Dan asked. "I was just checking out the van to see if there's anything we could salvage," Kyle said. "But it's not your van, is it?" Dan said, his voice stern. Kyle got the feeling that Dan was holding himself back with some effort. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would bother you. I wasn't taking anything. You said we could talk about us maybe using some of the parts to fix our van," Kyle said. Dan was silent for a moment. His face didn't change or soften at all, though. Finally, he said, "You've got work to do. I need you to put a new carburetor on the pickup inside. Dawn has the parts in the office." Then Dan turned and walked towards the garage. Kyle gave him a few seconds head start and started after him. When Belle turned the sign on the door to open, Liz realized something was wrong. Where's Jimmy? She asked as the first customers came inside. Belle shrugged. He's usually on time, but he hasn't been the same since. There was a dozen people inside the diner. Liz knew more were on the way. Liz had to put aside her worry for Jimmy and his sister. What can I get you? She asked the three men at her first table. 20 minutes later, Jimmy came in. Gone was any pretense of normality. His face was vacant. No, not vacant. Haunted. Hi, Jimmy, she said. He didn't look up until she repeated herself. Then he glanced at her, mustering a thin smile that died quickly. Liz hated to see the broken expression on his innocent, open face. It didn't belong there, even though Liz knew she'd seen it before, in her vision of Jimmy at his sister's funeral. Suddenly, Liz was overwhelmed with feelings of helplessness. For all the incredible things Max and her friends could do, things that she was beginning to do herself, they could do nothing to help a scared teenage girl in trouble, in this boy who had lost her sister. Belle came up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. Are you okay, Jimmy? She asked. He nodded. You don't have to work today if you don't want to. Why don't you go home? She said. He shook his head. She'll come here first. She knows I'm working today. Jimmy disappeared into the back and came out with his apron on. He immediately began collecting the first batch of dirty dishes. When he came back, he grabbed another tray to get some more. He stopped what he was doing for a moment, looked up at Belle and said, Sorry about the mess. What? She said. The mess. I'm sorry, he said. Then he turned quickly, accidentally smashing his tray into the pot of coffee that Marie was carrying. Maria let go immediately, and the coffee pot went flying to the floor, breaking and spilling half a pot of coffee onto the floor. Though Maria jumped back, Jimmy just looked at the coffee and then at Belle. Sorry, I'll clean it up. Belle was right there, putting a hand on Jimmy's shoulder again. It's okay. Why don't you come with me? She took Jimmy to an open booth near the window and sat him down gently. Why don't you take some time, Jimmy? She might come, he protested. Then you can stay right here and watch for her, Belle said. Okay, Jimmy said flatly. Liz and Maria immediately started cleaning up the mess when Belle came over and said, I'll get that. Going back to the kitchen, Liz picked up the order for her table. She looked at Jimmy sitting in his booth, staring brokenly out the window. He was waiting for his sister, but he somehow sensed that she wasn't coming. Whatever force that allowed Jimmy glimpses into the future was telling him that his sister's time is very short. Liz had the same feeling about Jessica's future. As she worked, Liz found herself thinking about Jimmy and the spilled sugar, then about the spilled coffee. Jimmy had known about each event before it happened, but had been unable to stop it. Tiresias, Liz remembered. That was the name of the man from ancient Greece who was cursed with the ability to see the future. It was powerless to change it. Well, Max had given Liz the power to see the future. Was that power, that incredible ability, going to be Liz's curse? She and Max had used the power just days ago to save the life of a woman who was attacked in an alley outside the crashdown. Then they had used it to save themselves from the gunman on graduation day. Were those two successes going to be the exception, not the rule? As Liz looked at Jimmy, sitting by the window, waiting for her sister, Liz was afraid that she already knew the answer. Chapter 15.
That is it, Max asked. Isabel was silent for a moment. Nothing that will help. She was dreaming about her brother. They were both younger. They were playing Candyland. So maybe she's okay for now, he said. Isabel shook her head. No, something's wrong. The dream was disjointed. She's fading somehow. And I got the feeling that the monster was always just around the corner. Max put his hand on her shoulder. You're doing everything you can. When she looked up, her eyes were ringed with tears. She was playing with her brother, Max. He's very sweet, and she loves him a lot. Max didn't need telepathy to know what Isabel was thinking. Isabel had been a sister for as long as he could remember, and for a lifetime on another world that he couldn't recall. How many rainy weekends had they spent playing Chutes and Ladders or Monopoly, sometimes with Michael, but always with each other? Why was Jessica dying? Was that image of playing with her brother going to be her last thought on Earth? Max had not had visions of the missing girl like Liz, nor had he shared a dream with her like Isabel. Nevertheless, he felt like he understood her. He wanted to say something else to Isabel, but could think of nothing to say, nothing to make this better. So he kept silent, but he did something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. He took Isabel's hand in his. A few minutes later, Michael approached the bench they were sitting on and said, looks like they won't be needing any help today meeting the community's laundry needs. Michael looked closely at Max and Isabel for a minute and said, no way, get up. You just can't sit here and stew. Come on, let's take a walk or something. Max shook his head. No, I don't want to leave Liz and Maria. We should
stay here, he said,
indicating the bench outside the diner. It wasn't rational, Max knew. Liz and Maria were indoors, in a public place with plenty of people around. Max was certain that he was being unreasonable, but he was equally certain that he wouldn't be going anywhere. Michael didn't argue. Okay, you're probably right. Michael sat down next to Max. After less than a minute, he said, but we can't just sit here all day. Max nodded. Come on, I have an idea. He led the trio back into the diner and approached Belle, who was working the register. When she smiled at him, he said, maybe there's some work we can do around here. There's lots we need done, but like really can't afford. We'll work for free, Max said before he could finish. Immediately, he felt Michael's elbow in his side. Belle looked surprised. Free, she asked. Well, Maria tells us that you're cutting us a break for our food, Max said. We'd like to thank you. He paused and then said, and frankly, it would let us keep an eye on Liz and Maria. Okay, hang around till the breakfast rush is over and we'll figure something out, Belle conceded. Kyle walked into the office and saw Dawn sitting there. She looked up immediately and smiled broadly. Hello, sugar, she said. Hi, he said. She looked good and he could immediately smell her perfume, but something had changed in him last night while he lay next to Isabel. Suddenly, Dawn looked like a dim shadow. What can I do you for? She asked. Who's Johnny? He asked, keeping his tone polite but neutral. Who? She said. Johnny, Johnny's garage, he said. Oh, she said, a look of recognition on her face. That Johnny, she said with a smile. Dawn didn't return the smile. Who is he? Kyle repeated. Dawn's response was neutral. He's Dan's brother. He was some kind of a war hero in Vietnam. He won a medal from Congress or something. Congressional Medal of Honor? Kyle offered. Yeah, I've heard my dad talk about him, she said. Did he open this place? Kyle asked. No, Dan's father did when he was born, or when he was young before. So before Dan was born, I think, Dawn said. Kyle nodded. So where is he now? Dawn looked confused. Where? Yes, where is Johnny? Does he ever come in? Kyle asked. Dawn shook her head and said, no, he's dead. He's died in the war. They gave him the medal. Posthumously, Kyle finished for her. Why are you interested? She asked. Kyle shrugged. Just curious. I found this out back, he said, holding out the photo. Dawn studied it for a moment and said, you think it's Dan and his brother? Maybe, Kyle said. Anyway, I'll just give it to Dan. Dan never talks about his brother. I just know because my dad knew them both when they were kids, she said. Okay, thanks, Kyle said, turning to go. Anytime, Dawn said, as he stepped outside. Kyle went back into the garage and approached Dan, who was getting ready to test drive one of the cars. Dan, I just wanted to apologize for poking around without asking you, he said. His boss didn't say anything for a minute, then said, don't worry about it. I still would like to put our van in one of the bays tonight and check it out. Working on it in a bit, Kyle said. It wasn't ideal. Without a new timing chain, he wouldn't be able to start the car, which made diagnosing other problems even tougher. Dan nodded. Sure, as long as you lock up. And I still need a timing chain, Kyle said. But even as he said it, Kyle sensed that Dan was sensitive about the van. It would never run again. Of that much, Kyle was sure. But it must mean something to Dan. Suddenly, he had the feeling that his boss wouldn't want to part with even pieces of it. I'll see if any of my suppliers have what you need, Dan said. That was it, Kyle realized. Maybe it was just as well. He would pay more from a classic car parts dealer, but he couldn't afford trouble with his boss. He was making more money at the garage than either Liz or Maria were making at the diner. The group needed him to keep this job. On the other hand, it would take longer to earn the money for the more expensive part, and it would take some time to have it shipped over. More delays, and they did need to move on. The closer they stayed to Roswell, the more danger they were in. And then there they were, the disappearances in the town. He knew Isabel could take care of herself, but he also knew he would feel better when they were out of here. Oh, I almost forgot, Kyle said, holding out the photo. I found this in the van, he added. Dan took the picture and looked down. He was so startled when he saw the image. It looked to Kyle like Dan had just been struck. The color drained from his face, and he stared down blankly. Then he turned the photo over and read the back. Something moved on Dan's face, and for a terrible moment, Kyle was afraid that his boss was going to burst into tears in front of him. Then Dan swallowed down whatever he was feeling, and his face was once again unreadable. Turning, he walked out toward the back door and said in a tight voice, "Get to work, Kyle." Kyle stared at him after him for a moment. Then he picked up the exhaust pipe he needed for his first car of the day and got started. "Can you kids paint?" Belle asked. Max nodded. "Sure," Michael said. "The outside?" Isabel asked. Max had also noticed the outside of the place needed it. "I was going to wait until Sam got around to it, but I'm not getting any younger," Belle said. "The front side and the back?" Michael asked. "Yes, might as well do the whole thing," Belle said. "It's pretty chipped. We'll probably have to scrape and prime it before we paint," Max said. The building was red brick underneath, but it had been painted many times since it was built. The last coat was white, but other colors showed through in a number of places, as well as the original red brick. "Just make it look nice. Match the white if you can. There's a ladder in the basement and some tools. Sam will show them to you. Then go see Harry at the hardware store to get everyone whatever else you need. Tell him it's for me and that he can put it on my account," Belle said. Then she turned toward the kitchen and shouted, "Sam." A few minutes later, they were rummaging around the basement, wading through an old restaurant equipment. They found a tall, extendable ladder as well as a 6-foot step ladder. There was also some drop cloths, old rollers, and one brush. They would be able to use all of it, and it would save Belle some money. At the hardware store, Harry had looked at them with distrust. Max didn't mind. He was used to it in this town, and knowing what he did about what was happening here, he understood it. Once Harry had called Belle, he had been helpful, if he had not particularly friendly. Less than half an hour later, they were putting on 3 pairs of painter's overalls. "I'll take the ground level," Isabel said. Max put the extendable ladder in position, grabbed a scraper, and started climbing. They were working on the side of the building, and Max started on the top left. He scraped with the chip paint while Isabel did the same on the ground, and Michael did the same from the step ladder. The prep work is most of the job, his father's voice said in his head. Do it right, or you'll be back at it again in a year. The summer after 6th grade, his father had taught him to paint. Don't overwork it, Max, Isabel said from below. It was more of his father's advice. When he looked down, he saw his sister. There was a slight smile on her face. He found himself returning it. That summer when Max was 13 and Isabel 14, Dad had announced they were going to paint the house. Still, he was 13 and there was a certain procedure for these things, so Max had protested. Isabel had too, but the next day the three of them were outside, surrounded by equipment and paint. It was a clear day early in the summer, and since it was pretty early in the morning, which had been a real sore point for Isabel, it was not hot yet. A few minutes into the job, Michael had shown up dressed in old shorts and a t-shirt. Glad you could make it, Michael, Dad had said. Sure, Michael replied. No protest. Michael actually wanted to be there, Max had marveled. While Max knew things were tough with his foster father, Michael was hanging around more and more. Max's parents acted as if it was perfectly normal. In fact, they'd taken to inviting him over themselves. A wave of feeling washed over him. He was surprised to find that he missed his parents. He shook it off. It had only been a couple of days, yet it would be much longer before he saw either of them again. Maybe never. He felt a stab in his stomach at that. It surprised him. Things had been rough with Mom and Dad after his and Liz's arrest for holding up the convenience store. Max had even moved out to live with Michael. He had not been able to tell his father the truth about why they had really done it, or the more important truth about who he and Isabel really were. Finally, they had told their parents the whole truth, and then they'd had to leave Roswell, which just wasn't safe for them anymore. But one summer before all of that, even before Liz, Max, Isabel, and Michael had painted the house with Dad. And soon the clear, warm air, the motion of the rollers on the side of the house, and some old rock and roll that was playing on the radio had begun to work on them all. Max had found all of his 13-year-old worries fading away. The group began to joke and laugh. Michael burped once. Then Dad had made a burping contest. Isabel had pretended to be disgusted at first, but she joined the game. In fact, Max remembered that she had won. It was a great summer, Max remembered. And the first day was one of the best days of his life, he realized. Max glanced down at Isabel and Michael. They were working steadily. Maybe the work would take Isabel's mind off things. Reminding himself to ask Belle if they could borrow a radio, Max got back to work. Chapter 16. Hey, time to take a break, mister, Liz said from down below, a smile on her face. Max climbed down as the others put down their tools. Shaking off the dust and paint chips, Michael said, you know, we'd be done already if we used our powers. That would be low profile, Isabel said. Just a thought, Michael said, raising his hands and smiling. Max quickly scanned the wall. They had almost finished scraping it smooth. As a result, they had made many patches that were bare brick or half a dozen different colors. It was already after the lunch rush now. With a break to eat, Max figured they would finish scraping the side and maybe the front by the end of the day. How's it going, Liz said. We'll be at it a few days, Max said. I think it's nice. Belle really appreciates it, Liz said. Well, we appreciate the food, Max said. And you want to keep an eye on me, Liz said seriously. Max shrugged as Michael said, I would really appreciate some food about now. Inside, Max saw Jimmy sitting by the window of the nearly empty diner. The boy looked like he hadn't moved since that morning when Max had seen him last. Jimmy was still looking out with the same forlorn stare. Max felt a stab of guilt at how much he had enjoyed working outside with his friends while Jimmy was inside thinking about his sister and worrying, with very good reason. Max knew. Suddenly he knew he had to help Jimmy and the nameless others in town who were lost or had lost loved ones. Just 2 days ago, he had said to Liz that he thought this path in life might be to use his powers to make a difference, to try to help people. Well, in front of Max was a person who needed help as badly as anyone he had ever seen. Helping him might be dangerous. That much he had learned from Liz's visions and Isabel's dream walk. But since he had come out of the pod, his entire life had been dangerous. Max didn't know if he really could help, but he knew he would try. As soon as he finished eating with the group at the diner, Kyle headed back for the garage. He didn't want to do anything to tick off Dan. He had clearly upset his boss and he didn't want to add to the trouble. Unless he kept his job, he might never get out of Stonewall. Outside Johnny's, Kyle saw Gomer for the first time that day. The bigger man glanced at Kyle and looked away quickly. Kyle hoped that meant his trouble with Gomer was over. He relaxed a little when Gomer climbed into the garage pickup truck and pulled away. When Kyle stepped into the garage, he saw Dan at work on an old station wagon. Dan had disappeared after Kyle had given him the photo, and Kyle was relieved to see him back at work. Kyle approached his next repair job, another tune-up, and Dan didn't even look up. Apparently things were back to normal. About an hour later, before he was finished with the tune-up, Kyle heard footsteps behind him. Immediately sure that Gomer was looking for trouble, Kyle spun around to find Dan standing behind him. Relieved, Kyle let out a sigh that was louder than he anticipated. Dan didn't seem to notice. Then Kyle saw the older man was holding out something. For a second, Kyle's brain wouldn't register what it was. Then it finally did. Dan was holding out a timing chain. For a second, Kyle found that his mouth wouldn't work. Fortunately, his hand still did, and he took the heavy chain from Dan. I pulled it from the van out back. You can put it in tonight after hours if you want, Dan said, his face as unreadable as ever. Thanks, I mean. This was great, Kyle replied. It's not free. It'll come out of your pay, Dan said. Of course, Kyle said. And here's a key for the padlock on the big garage door. Lock up when you're done. Dawn will lock up the office, he said. Thanks, Kyle said. Dan grunted and turned back to head for the office. Kyle carefully put the chain down. It was a very lucky break for them. He would probably be working late into the night to get into the engine of their van. Once that was done, he would be able to get it started and really get it running right. If they had to, they could probably be out of Stonewall in a few days, or a week at most, depending on how much Dan charged him for the parts he needed. Kyle used to dread full shifts at the garage in Roswell. Then he had seen his future ticking away every hour that he worked. Now his future and the future of his friends depended on his ability with cars. Kyle found himself looking forward to the next job. If he finished his cars early, he might be able to pull the engine of the van before dinner. That meant he would have no trouble getting the timing chain in and getting the engine back in the van before bed. For the first time, maybe first time ever, Kyle found himself eager to get back to work. Just after 4:30, Kyle went to get Max and Michael to help him push the van into a repair bay. Though they had been pleased by Kyle's news, they had left the diner reluctantly and then hurried back. Kyle understood. There was something odd in the air at Stonewall, and lately that air seemed to be getting thicker. He was glad the guys were staying close to Isabel, Liz, and Maria. That thought moved his hands even faster. He grabbed the engine lift and wheeled it over to the van. Yes, if he hurried, he could get it out before Liz called to tell him to come down for dinner. 2 hours later, when the phone shop rang, Kyle picked it up and knew it was Liz. Dinner bell, Kyle, she said. Kyle smiled as he said, I'll be right there. Before he headed out, he took a quick inventory of his work. The engine was out of the van. He even pulled the old timing chain, which hadn't broken so much as disintegrated in a number of places. He nearly trotted out the door. If he ate quickly, he would be able to get the new one in no problem. And if he was lucky, get the engine back in the van before it got too late. Kyle was the last to arrive. He came in excited and told them about the van. I'll need a few days to get to the van running well, but I should be able to get it started at least tonight, Kyle said. Max was pleased that it looked like they would be able to leave town in a week of less. I want to thank you, kids, Belle said as she brought out the first plates of food. The place looks great. Max smiled and said, actually, it looks much worse. It did. They had scraped almost the whole outside of the building smooth, but there were now oddly colored patches everywhere. The diner now looked like a mottled mess. Well, you'll get there, she said. We will prime and paint the front tomorrow first thing. Then we'll move on to the rest, he said. Fine, she said as she headed back to get more plates. When the food was all out, Belle came out and said, would you girls mind locking up? I have to go see my sister. She shook her head and muttered, my good-for-nothing's brother-in-law. Sure, Liz said. Whatever you do, girls, don't marry a good-for-nothing lazy bum named Rex, Belle said. We'll remember that, Maria said. Less than a minute later, Belle was leaving with Sam in tow. She stopped by Jimmy's table and said, come on, Jimmy, we'll take you home. Jimmy looked up, his eyes rimmed and red, and said, what if she comes? She'll know how late it is and know to go home. Come on, you need some sleep so you can come in tomorrow, Belle said. Okay, Jimmy said, and he headed for the door. Then he turned and walked over to Liz. I'm sorry about your friend, he said, quickly glancing over at the table. Was he looking at Max? My what? Liz said. Sorry, he said, and turned to leave. Liz stopped him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. Which friend? She asked. Jimmy shrugged, then he turned to go. Belle came over and took him by the arm. Don't mind Jimmy, he says the strangest things. An odd look crossed Belle's face. Liz wondered how much Belle knew about Jimmy's ability. Then Belle was all business again as she led Jimmy out the door with Sam in tow. As soon as the door closed, Liz turned to Max and said, oh my God. Max knew what she was thinking, but he shook his head. It'll be okay. No, it won't, Liz said, raising her voice. Nothing is going to happen to me or to any of us, Max said with more certainty than he felt. Jimmy has never been wrong. He has some version of what I have. He sees things before they happen, Liz said. Liz, Maria said, putting her hand on Liz, you predicted the assassination attempt on yourself and our alien friends here 12 days in advance. Jimmy predicted a spills in a diner. If you predicted one every day, you'd be right 100% of the time. No, he has the same gift or something like it, Liz said. I'll be careful, Max said. Maybe we should talk about getting out of here, Liz said. Then she turned to Kyle. If we had to go, could the van get us to the next town tomorrow? Kyle was silent for a moment, and Max spoke before he could respond. No, Max said. We're going to stay and help these people. Max, you're in danger, Liz said. He knew how badly Liz wanted to help out here, but she was also concerned for him, and the two desires were now at war inside her. We're going to help Jimmy, and we don't know anything about what Jimmy saw, but maybe he saw me get hurt leaving town, Max said. Most likely he saw you facing whoever it is that is hurting people in this town. The monster from Isabel's dream, Liz said. We're out here to make a difference. You said it yourself, Max said. And before Liz spoke, he added, if the danger was to you, what would you do? Liz nodded. Then she turned to Michael. You'll keep him out of trouble? Michael didn't smile or joke. He just nodded and said, yes. I thought you were the one who didn't want to take any chances in this town, Liz said. Max nodded. He thought about his own sister and his friends. I changed my mind, he said finally. We still don't know if there's anything we can do, Michael said. Isabel shook her head. I haven't been able to contact her again. She may be awake or drugged or out of it, or I don't think so. I saw Jimmy go to her funeral and she hasn't turned up yet. I think we're running out of time, Liz said. Another vision, Max said. A feeling, Liz said. I don't know what else we can do besides keeping our eyes open, Michael said. Then I guess we keep our eyes open, Max said. And are we even going to consider the possibility that, well, what Gomer said, Maria said, that the girls were taken by aliens, Michael said. Isabel did see a monster in the dream, Maria said. And you said that monsters were metaphors, Michael replied. I know, I'm just saying that we should consider the possibility, she said. I don't think so, Liz said. What are the odds of us running into aliens out here? Isabel, Maria said. Isabel shook her head and said, I don't know. The dream was awful, but that monster was like no alien we've ever seen. It just doesn't seem likely. I agree, Max said. We're dealing with a psycho or maybe a small group, but we have no reason to think anything else. Either way, we do the only thing we can to keep our eyes open. I read a thriller about a kidnapping in Texas, Liz said. The kidnappers are caught something like 95% of the time. That got Max's attention. That's good, he said. Liz nodded. The problem is that 85% of the time, the victims don't make it. Another spell of silence descended on the table. If I stay up late, I might be able to patch the van up so we can make a quick getaway tomorrow, Kyle said. No, Max said. We're in this for the long haul. We're going to need the van in good shape. Do it right and take the time you need. We'll leave when we're ready and get far away from here. Besides, Max turned to Michael, smiled, and said, when it starts to go down in the street, we don't leave until it's finished, Michael replied. Max heard a sharp intake of breath and then smack. Ow, Michael said, rubbing his shoulder when Maria struck him. This is not a gangster movie, Maria said. It's not just as well. It's just as well. They tend to end badly, Mr. Sonny Corleone. It was just a joke, Michael said. Not a very funny one, Maria said. Kyle rose, explaining, I'd better get back. I want to at least get the engine back into the van. Be careful, Max said. Always, Kyle said as he left the diner. Everyone remained silent. Kyle wondered if they were all thinking the same thing he was, that there wasn't much time left before. He wasn't sure what was coming, but he was certain that it was coming quickly. Like Liz said, it was a feeling.
Chapter 17. When Kyle approached the garage, he was glad to see that there was no sign of Gomer's pickup. He was also surprised to see movement through the office window. He caught a flash of blonde hair. Dawn. He entered the garage quietly through the large door. Kyle hadn't seen her enter the shop area since he had started at Johnny's. With any luck, she would just go whenever she was done. Back at the van, he was glad he had already rigged up the engine on the lift. He was getting tired after the long day, and he was slowing down after eating as well. Max had said they were in this for the long haul. There was no point in staying up all night to work on the van. He would have a long enough day tomorrow. Well, if he pushed a little, he could wrap up the work in maybe an hour. He would have the engine set and bolted into place by then. He would take care of the finishing work tomorrow. About an hour later, he tightened the last bolt on the last engine mount. Then he decided to clean up and join the others. As he closed up the engine compartment, he realized that there was something different about the air. It smelled. Cool hands reached around and touched his face, then covered his eyes. The air smelled nice. It was Dawn. Guess who? She asked, laughing. He placed his hands on hers and held them there for a long moment. Then he gently pulled them away. Without thinking, he realized that he was smiling. I don't know, Dan, he teased as he turned around. Her eyes flared in mock anger for a second, then she smiled. Oh, it's you, he said. Yes, it's me, she said, and then she just looked at him silently. Working late, he asked, his voice rough. Surprisingly, he found that he was nervous. She shook her head. Dan's website, you're going to have to help me with that, she said. Maybe tomorrow, or Kyle began. I didn't mean tonight, she said. I'm sure we can come up with something better to do tonight. Kyle's throat went dry. She watched him with a look of mild amusement on her face. What do you think, Kyle? She said. As it turned out, Kyle found that his mind was completely blank. Then all he could think of was how good she smelled. What was that perfume? He thought. And then she was moving. She leaned into him and put one hand around the back of his neck. As she pulled his head down, she extended her own neck. Then she was kissing him, soft and then open. For a moment, Kyle felt it. Sweet relief. This was exactly what he had wanted from the first second he had seen her sitting at her desk. There was no aliens, no special unit, no bullies. Oh, no bullets slamming into his chest, no secrets, only her, and she was sweet. For what seemed like a long time, Kyle lost himself in her. He kissed her firmly, and she answered back even more forcefully. This was what he needed. He wasn't a monk, and Buddha's middle way did not ask him to be. Dawn was what he needed, but what he wanted was Isabel, not Dawn. When the realization hit him, it did so with a sudden force that he felt in the stomach. He pulled his mouth away from hers. For a moment, she pulled him back with her tight grip. Then he was free again, pushing himself away gently but firmly. What is it, Kyle? She asked, a light still on her eye. A light still on in her eyes. I can't, Dawn, he said weakly. She glanced down and smiled at him again. I know for a fact that isn't true, she said. She was still smiling, but the smile was getting tighter by the second. I like you, I really like you, but I won't be staying in Stonewall, he said, gaining more confidence in his own voice. The light in her eyes was almost completely out now. The look on her face hardened. I didn't ask you to, did I? Dawn reminded him. And the van's full. I can't take anyone with me, he said. Her eyes cold, she said. I didn't ask you to do that either. I'm sorry, he began. I know. You can't, she said sharply. Please understand, he said. Understand what? She asked. I mean, I do like you, he said. Her cold stare told him that she was expecting something more from him. But how to explain? How could he explain that it meant more to him to sit next to Isabel than it did to kiss her? How could he explain that he would rather talk to Isabel than anything with her? Isabel was an impossible situation. She was still married and up until days ago had been living happily with her husband. She wouldn't care what Kyle did with this girl, but he would care. It would matter to him. He couldn't make Dawn understand all of that, and she probably didn't really want him to try. I'm sorry, I really am, but there is someone else in my life, he said. He saw a brief flash before the side of his face exploded into red. Smack. His hand was touching his cheek before what had happened registered on him. As he rubbed the place where she slapped him, she began shouting. Then why are you even playing with me, Kyle? She said, drawing his name out like it was a curse. He thought she was overreacting. He felt compelled to try to calm her down. Was all he could say. This whole game, she said, her voice getting louder still. Kyle kept silent. He had nothing to say. At least there was nothing he could say that would make things worse. You've just been playing with me, having a good joke at the local girl's expense, she railed. It had been a long time since he had seen a girl truly angry, and even longer still since he had been on the receiving end of that rage. It was unsettling. I'm sorry, he said again, but he knew it was lame. Apparently she did too. She was still angry, but something was changing. Her eyes were beginning to get red. Uh-oh, he thought. Angry was better. As she started to sob, she turned and stormed away. Kyle let out a sigh, glad it was over, but before he had taken another breath, Kyle heard Gomer's voice. Dawn, he called out. Kyle could hear concern in his voice. Gomer stepped into the garage. He didn't even glance Kyle's way and said, Your dad said that you told him not to pick you up. I just wanted to make sure you got home okay. Yeah, and make sure she didn't work too late with me here, Kyle thought. Dawn didn't respond. She just kept walking across the shop floor toward him. When she was just a few steps away, Kyle could get that Gomer had finally seen her face. What's going on here? He asked, looking first to Dawn, then to Kyle. We were just talking, Kyle said. Then he saw Dawn's shoulders shake and heard her first sob. Gomer looked both surprised and confused. Great, Kyle thought. When Gomer looked at Kyle again, Kyle saw that something else was brewing here. You, Gomer said, glaring at Kyle. Kyle saw that the only thing that kept Gomer from coming after him was Dawn falling into Gomer's arms. Whatever control she had fell away, and she sobbed openly into his chest. What did he do to you? Gomer asked. Kyle had thought Gomer sounded dangerous before, when he had trapped Kyle into the car, but now Kyle knew that Gomer had just been playing then, because now he was hearing what Gomer sounded when he was really dangerous. What Gomer sounded like when he was really dangerous. Well, Kyle had faced bigger and tougher guys on the football field. He could be pretty dangerous himself, and he wasn't stuck under a 3-ton car now. Kyle felt a shot of adrenaline race through his system. Gomer was holding Dawn, but looking up at Kyle with murder in his eyes. Ludo only knew what he was thinking. When Dawn's sobs began to subside, Gomer pulled back a little and said to her, What happened here? Nothing, she squeaked. I just want to go home. Sure, in a minute, Gomer said, completely disengaging himself from Dawn. He immediately headed for Kyle. Kyle squeezed the fist on his right hand into a ball, ready. He was tired of running and decided that he was going to give Gomer a surprise. It was almost too bad that he and Gomer would be getting into it over Dawn. Though Kyle knew that he had done nothing to her, Gomer didn't. Kyle was tired of being a victim. Nevertheless, if Gomer kept his head, Kyle wouldn't make a move against him. But it looked like Gomer was going to make the first move. Without stopping, he reached out with both hands and shoved Kyle hard. Expecting it, Kyle didn't hesitate. He stood his ground and shoved back even harder. That surprised Gomer. The fury in his eyes dulled a bit, and uncertainty began to dawn there. What did you do? Gomer said. Nothing, Kyle said. At least nothing to dawn. Touch me again, and I will take you apart, though. Kyle saw that Gomer was buying his bravado. The uncertainty in the bigger man's eyes was growing. Dawn, did he hurt you? Gomer asked, not taking his eyes off Kyle. There was a long pause, and then Dawn said, No, he's just a jerk. Take me home, Gomer. Gomer studied Kyle for a few seconds and then began to back away. You're lucky, Gomer said to Kyle, trying to sound tough. Kyle felt a rush of satisfaction. He had won the showdown and had done it without striking a blow. Maybe Gomer wasn't much of an opponent, and this hadn't been much of a contest, but it still felt good to win one, to win something. As Kyle watched Gomer help Dawn into his pickup, he felt his body relaxing slowly. Rather than waiting around, he decided to lock up and go see the others. He would have plenty of time tomorrow to work on the van. He pulled the large shop area door shut. They were the old-fashioned kind that opened from the sides instead of the newer ones that opened up and down. The doors were heavy and squeaked on their wheels as he pulled them together. Then Kyle locked the two doors together with a padlock and looked up in time to see Gomer's pickup heading down the road into the rapidly darkening sky. As soon as he turned away, he felt an odd vibration in the ground. Earthquake? He wondered. Inside the room, Max felt the ground shake underneath him. He was immediately on guard. Instinctively, he turned to the others to make sure they were okay. His best friend was wearing the same hyper-alert expression than Max. Then Max was sure it was on his own face. What was that? Liz asked. I don't know, Max replied, a chill running up and down his spine. He had a very bad feeling about whatever was going on. By the look on his best friend's face, he was not the only one. Let's check it out, Maxwell, Michael said, getting up. Max was always speeding a second. Wait here, Michael said to Maria. We'll be right back, Max said to Liz. You'll be right back? You're going to leave us here while you check out whatever is out there? Maria said. As Maria spoke, the shaking of the ground turned into a deep rumbling that was getting stronger. She's right, Max said. Everybody stay together. We'll find Kyle and go from there. Kyle ran toward the road and followed the lights of the pickup as it drove from the garage in the center of the town. As the ground started to shake even more around him, Kyle saw the pickup begin to weave on the street. Then he saw a loud crash and saw it come to a sudden stop as if it were slamming into a wall that he couldn't see. The rear of the pickup seemed to lift into the air and hang there for an instant. Then the lights in the pickup went out. Kyle could still see the outline of the vehicle, but it began to dim in front of him. No, that wasn't it. The truck wasn't dimming. It was just getting darker, much darker. Looking up, Kyle could see the night sky and stars clearly above him, but the road around the pickup was nearly pitch dark. Looking into the darkness made Kyle queasy. Then he was not just queasy, he was nauseated. Something about the darkness made him want to. The world seemed to be moving in slow motion, and then Kyle heard someone call his name. Max. It was Max. With effort, he turned away from the side in front of him and saw Max and the others approaching him at a run. They were looking at him and past him towards the pickup. Kyle wanted to tell them not to look, but then the darkness was gone and he saw a bright light shining on his fronts. The ground continued to shake, harder. Kyle turned quickly to see a large, brightly lit something hovering over the ground. The ship, if that's what it was big, almost as big as Johnny's garage. It also seemed like a perfect cylinder, almost like a giant solid pipe. It was covered with maybe half a dozen small white lights and another half a dozen large searchlights that moved and crisscrossed over the road and surrounding area. For a terrible moment, Kyle saw one of the searchlights point directly at him, as his ears told him that his friends were right behind him. The light was blinding, and Kyle had to close his eyes and then turn around. Finally, he could see the searchlight circle track away from him. He turned to focus on his friends, but a bright after image obscured his vision. When his eyes began to refocus, he turned around to see the cylinder continue to hover. Then the lights went out all at once, and Kyle heard a rush of air as the ship raced away. He tried to track it with his eyes, but he looked away when he saw the cloud of darkness again. When he looked back, the ship was nowhere to be seen. Oh my God, he heard Maria say from behind him. Chapter 18. Oh my God, Oh my God, Max, it was a ship, Liz said from behind. Max nodded, still looking out into the sky. It was a ship. There was no question about that, Max thought. The only question was what they did now. His instinct was to pile himself and his friends into the van or whatever vehicle was handy and get as far away from Stonewall as they possibly could. Kyle, are you okay? Max asked his friend. Yeah, I got here a few seconds before you did, he said. Kyle didn't look hurt, but he was obviously shaken up. There was something else, too, something in his face. Are you sure? Max asked. Or Max said. I think so. I feel a little sick, Kyle said. He explained about the black cloud that had hidden the ship, or whatever it was. Looking into that darkness made me feel sick to my stomach. I can't explain it, Kyle said. What kind of technology was that? What kind of ship, Max? Who are they? Liz asked. That was nothing like the ship that brought us here. A skin ship, maybe? Michael said. I don't think so, Isabel said in a very firm voice. I think I know exactly who they are, or at least what they look like. Who is it? Max asked. The monster from Jessica's dream. I think she was dreaming about the things that took her, she said. Then a sound disturbed the quiet around them. Until Max heard it, he hadn't realized how quiet it had been. Since they'd arrived, there hadn't been any of the usual insect sounds, not even the endless chirping of crickets that usually went on all night. This sound was a growling. No, not a growling. It was someone moaning. Help me, a weak voice said. I'll go, Max said. Then he caught a glimpse of Liz's face and corrected himself. We'll all go. The group approached the pickup. The truck was angled towards them, and Max could see that the front end was pretty well smashed. As they approached, someone pushed his way out of the pickup. Max recognized him immediately. Gomer, Kyle said. The large man staggered away from them to the side of the road. Gomer, Kyle repeated as he rushed to the pickup to look inside. Gomer, Kyle shouted. Gomer finally turned around and looked at Kyle as if he didn't recognize him. Max saw that the tow truck driver had a bloody nose. Other than that, he looked okay. Where is Dawn? Kyle asked. They took her, Kyle said, his voice... they took her, Gomer said, his voice weak. Max knew that the next logical question was, who took her? But Kyle didn't ask it. They all knew. What happened? Max asked. I don't know, Gomer said. The man's head seemed to clear a small fraction, but he still looked like he was in a fog. Shock, Max thought. Kyle had produced a rag from somewhere and handed it to Gomer. Put this on your nose, Kyle said. Liz put a hand on Gomer's shoulder and said, Gomer, do you remember anything? That seemed to bring him out of his haze a little more. We were driving. Then it got dark all of a sudden, Gomer said. He was struggling to remember details. Then we crashed into something, he said, shaking his head, but there was nothing there. Gomer took a breath and continued. It was too dark to see, but there was noise. Dawn screamed. I tried to grab her, but something had her. The dark. There was something wrong with it. Max could see that he was barely holding himself together. He looked like he was about to cry, and then something else crossed his face. In a huge heave, Gomer leaned over and threw up on the side of the street. Kyle took a position next to him to see if he was all right. Max, I think we have to call the police, Liz said. What do we tell them? Michael jumped in. That aliens kidnapped Dawn and we should know because... Max shushed him with a wave. Then he called for Kyle, who left Gomer leaning on the pickup several feet away. We do have to report this, Max said, keeping his voice down. A girl is missing. We can't talk to the police. God knows who is looking for us. There's probably alerts across the country for us, Michael said. And if we disappear right after another girl is kidnapped, every cop in the state will be after us. And they'll have a pretty good idea of where we are. I don't like it either, but we don't have a choice. We'll have to take our chances. We tell the truth. We heard a crash and found Gomer in the car. Nothing about the ground shaking or the ship. Gomer is the only witness to the abduction, and he didn't see anything. Then a thought struck Max. Whoever was after them would be looking for Six. Michael, why don't you take the girls back to the room? Kyle and I will answer their questions. The others nodded, and then Kyle said, I'll get Gomer into the office and call Dan. Kyle grabbed Gomer by the shoulders and said, come on, let's get you some help. A little earlier, Kyle had been ready to take Gomer apart. Now he felt nothing but sympathy for the shaken figure in front of him. Gomer stood up and allowed himself to be led towards the garage. Dawn, he muttered. We'll call Dan and then the police, Kyle said. He had reached the office door, and Kyle realized that he didn't have a key for that. So he had to prop Gomer against the door and run to open the shop area door. Once that was done, he led Gomer inside and into the office from there. Instead of a couch, the office had a large bench seat from an old car. Kyle put Gomer down on that and reached for the phone and dialed. After a few rings, his boss picked up. Yes, Dan's voice said. Dan, it's Kyle. I'm in the office. There's been trouble. Gomer and Dawn were in an accident. Are they okay? Dan asked, concerned in his voice. I've got Gomer here, but Dawn is missing. Kyle said. Missing? She was in a wreck. She can't have gotten far, Dan said. It's not that. We think Gomer thinks that someone took her, Kyle said. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then Dan asked, does Gomer need a doctor? Kyle took a look at Gomer. He had a vacant look on his face and was shaking. Yes, he said. I'll call an ambulance to the state police. Stay there, Dan said. Less than 2 minutes later, a disheveled Dan appeared in the office. He looked over Gomer, who was half out of it on the couch. The ambulance will be here soon. The state police too. What happened, Kyle? Dawn was working late. She came into the shop and we talked for a minute. Then Gomer came to pick her up and they left together. I was locking up when I saw the truck hit something in the road. Then its lights went out. I ran over. We heard the accident too, Max said. We found Gomer, but not Dawn. Gomer said someone took her, Kyle said. Dan was upset, but seemed satisfied with her story. And then a few minutes later, the ambulance showed up. 2 state police officers arrived just as Gomer was getting loaded into the back of the ambulance. Max and Kyle told the same story they told Dan, and the state police officers tried to question Gomer, whose muttered replies didn't make much sense. One of the 2 officers came back and took out a pad. What are your names, boys? That was it. Kyle knew if they gave their real names, they were dead. The FBI certainly had them on some sort of wanted list by now. If they gave fake names, their false identities would fall apart as soon as the police asked for identification. Max said. He hesitated only for a moment and said, Max Load. That was it. Max had thrown the dice. They had already told Dan their real first names. They couldn't tell the cops something different. Their last names, on the other hand. I'm Kyle Miller, Kyle said. The officer studied them with disinterest and turned to Dan. Do you know these boys? He asked. Dan said. Yes. Kyle works for me and they're staying in my studio out back. The cop didn't hesitate. He just closed his notebook and said, stick around. We'll question Boomer when he's feeling better. Then we may have some more questions for you boys. Max and Kyle nodded. Do you know the girl's folks? The officer asked Dan, who nodded and gave them the address. I should go with you, Dan said, his voice tight. I know her father pretty well. The officer nodded and they left together. Kyle tried not to show his relief. Less than 3 days into their trip, it had almost ended with a simple, let me see some identification, please. When they had first arrived in Stonewall, Kyle had looked down on it for being a hick town, the Sticks. Well, apparently they did things a little differently in the Sticks. And that difference, it just saved their lives.